We're here with Stewart Harper, who is the Conservative Party candidate for the Leeds North West constituency. Thank you very much, Stewart, for joining us today. Just to start off, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your background?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to come and talk to you. I've been a member of the party for about 4 years, but I've lived in Leeds for about the last 15 years. I've originally born and brought up in Essex, and then came up to Leeds a number of years ago. I've got involved in the party because I believe in the values that it stands for.
So Stuart, in June, the government set a world-leading goal of cutting emissions to virtually zero by 2050. However, interim emissions targets have already started to slip behind. Can a Conservative government actually deliver on this important environmental promise?
Setting a target of net zero, with the first major economy in the world to do so. But let's not be under any illusion that that's an easy target to reach. So we have got a lot of work to do, but our record's quite strong in that. First of all, setting the target in the first place, but also the work that we've done in order to start to invest in greener technologies, for example, in terms of battery technologies in the UK, which is a world leader in developing electric cars. There is the start of that process. It's not easy, but yes, based on previous experience, based on previous records, the government is absolutely committed to that, and so am I personally.
Can a voting public really think that Boris Johnson's serious about tackling the climate issue when he can't make the time to attend a specific environmental leaders debate?
Well, look, that debate was a debate. We put somebody forward. So Michael Gove has been the Environment Secretary, is now the Minister responsible for taking forward our Brexit planning. He's a very senior minister in the government, and he was put forward onto that programme. But regrettably, he was turned away. I think the fact that we saw an ice sculpture put in his place was probably a sign that actually it suited the producers' to narrative, that he wasn't there.
A transport promise is to build a new rail line from Manchester to Leeds. This isn't expected to be completed before 2040. So more immediately, what will you do to improve public transport in Leeds?
Leeds as a city is the largest in Western Europe without a rapid transport system, by which I mean an integrated system like a tram or a trolleybus or whatever it might be. And I think that's a real problem. Leeds City Council has had an awful lot of money sat in the bank ready to go. Now I'm pleased to see that the local authorities are working together, indeed with University of Leeds academic staff, to look at what the options are. It's actually written into our manifesto that that Leeds as a city needs to have a rapid transport system, and we're very much in favour of that. But we also need to think about some of the other developments that are happening when houses are built on greenfield sites without infrastructure being put in place. Every house that is built means 2 more cars on the road on average. So we need to think about where those are being built and make sure that we're not just putting more and more houses onto greenfield sites and adding to congestion in those parts of the city.
And just leading on from that, there's a strong investment on the car, shown through your manifesto, with £2 billion being spent on potholes and a further £29 billion being just spent on general road maintenance. Will this really be tackling the problem of reducing the amount of cars on the road and the overall emissions produced by these?
Well, what it will do is make sure that when we're using the roads, first of all, that cars are moving more freely. If you've got cars moving more freely, then you've not got the emissions of people sat in traffic jams, which is when the pollution is growing.
So moving on to education, you come from an education background yourself. Within the Conservative Party manifesto, there's a lack of focus on tuition fees, but it does state that you will look at interest rates on loan repayments with a view of reducing the burden of debt on students.
At the moment, no student pays anything up front, and they only pay back their fees if they earn more than they would have otherwise earned. So if they earn more than the national average, they will pay a small proportion of their income back as tuition fees. They're written off after 30 years. And the current estimate is that the taxpayer will pick up somewhere in the region of 40%, 50%. Too often people perceive it as, this large debt at the end of their studies, which they'll immediately be asked to repay. That was the old system. That was the same system that Labour brought in, which, I don't think is fair. The proportion of students that goes to university has continued to rise. and the proportion of students from disadvantaged backgrounds, lower incomes, has risen even faster. So it is not something that we should be thinking is putting disadvantaged students off. It's not. It's in fact increasing their access to it. Yes, we do need to look, I think, at the interest rate, and yes, we do need to look at the support that we give to disadvantaged students for living costs. But we're not charging students fees up front. We're saying to them, if you benefit from the education that you receive, then you should pay a proportion of it back.
So the Conservatives have changed their stance on providing bursaries to training nurses. You will provide students with a 5,000 to 8,000 annual maintenance grants every year during their course. Was it a mistake to take them away in 2017? And how can students trust that you won't remove the bursaries if you're elected?
Well, look, when we came into power in 2010, we were left in a pretty difficult position. Even by the admission of the previous government, they'd run out of money. We had to take some difficult decisions. And one of the unfortunate elements of that was the removal of the bursary. But now we've got the economy back in a better position. Now we can look to see where we can invest in. So nursing bursaries is a prime example. I think we have to recognise that if we're going to attract the 50,000 more nurses that we want to bring into our NHS by the end of the decade, then we need to look about both recruitment and retention. And the recruitment side of it, it's about saying to nursing students, look, we recognise that in doing this, it's more than a job, it's a vocation, therefore we will support you through a bursary scheme.
So there's currently a 40,000 shortfall of NHS nurses, which is expected to increase to 70,000 by 2024. Even if the Conservatives do manage to recruit 50,000 more nurses, you still be short. How do you expect to deal with this problem?
It's about retention as well as recruitment. So it's about looking at the terms and conditions that we have for our staff in the NHS. But I also think it's about looking at the way that the system works as well. It's not always about just putting more money in. If we can look at ways that we can reduce the burden on some of our healthcare workers and improve the efficiency of the system, not of the efficiency of the individuals, then we can free them up. Therefore, more goes further, if you like. There is an element of the system not always working, so integration of records as a prime example. So a lot of time is spent within the NHS moving patient records, in effect, and doing handovers, where a more digital and integrated approach can really make a difference.
During a press conference, President Trump said that when you're dealing with trade, everything's on the table, so the NHS or anything else. How can you reassure the public that the NHS won't be up for sale and that under a Conservative government there won't be an increased privatisation in the NHS?
We can state categorically, the NHS is not for sale, it never will be for sale. And What's quite worrying is the way that has been sort of manipulated. Some of the documents and discussions have been manipulated actually to scare people that are the worst off potentially and are most reliant on the NHS. So yeah, there's discussions going on as part of a trade deal, not to sell the NHS, but to make sure that we have access to the best possible medicines within the service.
You're running in a 64% Remain constituency. And you actively campaign to leave the EU. Personally, do you think that the majority of your voters within Leeds North West want to put another a Brexiteer in Parliament?
But actually, when I've spoken to the hundreds and hundreds of people I have over the last few weeks, the overwhelming view from them comes back of either they voted leave or they voted remain, but that they recognise and respect the result of that referendum. They don't want to rerun the whole thing. They don't want another 3.5 years of Parliament being in paralysis. What they want us to do is start talking about the other issues that we've already talked about this morning. They want us to get Brexit done. We want to leave the European Union by the 31st of January so that we can respect that result of that referendum in 2016. But then we've got a period of time to negotiate a new relationship. You have to set a deadline. Yes, it's an ambitious deadline, but we believe we can do it. The European Union have shown that they want to do a deal with us. They want a good, strong trading relationship with us. So yes, there'll be some intense discussions in the first part of 2020, but I believe we can get there.
The Conservatives rebranded themselves as a Fact Check UK on Twitter during the ITV leaders debate, and Twitter accused the Conservatives of misleading the public. How important is the truth in this election, and why should people trust the Conservatives after this event?
Well, look, that Twitter page, I looked at it on the night. It was very, very clear that it was a Conservative Party page. The handle remained CCHQ Press, which it was pre and post the event. The banner headline on it still said from the Conservative Party press office. And secondly, the thing I'd say is that the Labour Party have exactly the same system running all year round. Ours was changed for the debate night to try and get across the facts around what Jeremy Corbyn was coming out with, about the facts of his damaging economic policies. Trust is probably at a low point in politics at the moment, because I think there's a lot of people that will look at the politicians they elected in 2017 and say, well, have you actually gone and done the things that you've said they will do? And that's why we're where we are. That's why we're in an election period. So I don't think the Twitter handle makes a huge amount of difference to that debate. What I do think is important is that over the last few years, actually politicians haven't delivered on the things that they stood for.
So Leeds is a very multicultural city. Personally, do you struggle to defend comments that Boris Johnson makes about, for example, Muslim women looking like letterboxes?
Well, I think it's incumbent on everybody that stands for public office. I think it's incumbent on every individual to be careful about the language that they use. What I would say is go back and look at that article, and in the context in which it was written, I think those comments have been somewhat misinterpreted and have been taken out of context. But I recognise, those are not always the easiest statements to make. But I don't believe that that's a man who holds Islamophobic views or racist views. He can speak for himself, and he has apologised for those. We have to do more and more that we can to make sure that we do. Leeds is a multicultural city, and I welcome that, and I welcome actually the overall move in the country to be a much more welcoming, open, diverse and tolerant society that we're in. So it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that the language we use encourages, not discourages that.
Just in a couple of sentences, can you say why students should vote for you?
Well, I think if you vote for me on the 12th of December, then you're voting for somebody who lives locally, who cares about where they live, who understands education, who understands the university system and understands concerns that students have. But also you're voting for a party that wants to make sure that when you graduate in 1, 2, 3, 4 years' time, you've got good jobs to go to, that you have strong earning potential, that your families have got good access to good schools, to good hospitals, that crime is cut and police numbers are increased, whilst building a strong economy throughout that.